southern France. Near Ramatuelle, Audie Murphy led a bold attack against German positions, earning the Distinguished Service Cross, just one of many decorations he would receive before the war ended. By late 1944, he had already been wounded several times and decorated repeatedly for bravery. He was not a Hollywood star. He was not a legend. Not yet. He was simply an exceptionally tough, highly competent combat leader in a regiment full of experienced fighters. But the action that would define his name in history still lay ahead. In the winter woods, near Holzwihr, on one side of this story stands Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, now a platoon leader. In Company B, "15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division." He is young, battle-hardened, physically small, but his men have seen him fight, and they trust his judgment. He commands a company, worn down by months of combat. By January 1945, when they reach the woods near Holzwihr, Company B is badly under strength, closer to a large platoon than a full company on paper. Behind them, the power of the U.S. Army exists. In theory, artillery, tanks, logistics. But out here, in the snow, what matters most are a few dozen riflemen at the edge of a forest, and the officers trying to keep them alive. On the other side are German forces defending the Colmar Pocket. Veteran troops, backed by armor and artillery, under orders to hold. This last bridgehead, on the western bank of the Rhine. The units around Holzwihr include elements of the 2nd Mountain Division, with armored support, tough formations, even this late in the war. They have prepared positions, local knowledge, and the defensive mindset of men who know there is nowhere left to fall back to but Germany itself. The battlefield between them is a harsh winter landscape. Open fields of snow stretch out from the village, broken by ditches, hedgerows, and the stark line of woods where Murphy's men dig in. The ground is frozen hard, making proper foxholes difficult to dig. Cold bites into fingers and faces. Breath hangs in the air. Every movement is an effort. The village of Holzwihr lies a short distance away, sheltering German infantry and armor that can move forward under cover of buildings and tree lines. Before crossing the open ground, on paper, the German side has more men, more armor, and the advantage of attacking a shattered company with limited fortifications. On paper, the outcome of a direct clash here should not be in doubt. But battles are not fought on paper. They are fought by human beings. Some ordinary, some extraordinary. Making decisions. In the worst conditions imaginable. By the night of January 25, 1945, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment was holding a position in the woods north of Holtzwihr. The price of getting there had been brutal. Out of roughly 120 men, 102 had been killed or wounded in the advance through the Bois de Riedveer. What was left of the company, little more than a reinforced platoon, was shattered and exhausted. All the other officers in the company were gone. Only one remained. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. The men dug what cover they could into the frozen ground. The temperature plunged well below freezing. The soil was so hard it was almost impossible to dig proper foxholes. They sheltered behind trees, roots, and whatever shallow scrapes they could manage. Murphy knew the enemy wouldn't leave them alone for long. The Germans had already shown they would counterattack fiercely to hold the Colmar pocket. At first light on January 26th, the Americans improved their positions as best they could. To bolster the fragile line, 2 M10 tank destroyers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion were sent forward to support Company B. The M10s were not heavy tanks. They were lightly armored, open-topped vehicles mounting a 3-inch gun and, crucially, a .50 caliber machine gun on a ring mount above the turret. They had the firepower to knock out enemy armor, but they were vulnerable to artillery, tank shells, and small arms. Still, in that frozen clearing, any armored support gave the Americans a little more confidence. Murphy helped position the tank destroyers where they could cover the most likely German approach across the open fields. Then they waited. Men checked their rifles, adjusted their gear, took what cover they could find. Everyone sensed the same thing. The Germans were not done yet. Around 2 p.m. On January 26th, the attack came. A German artillery barrage opened up, pounding the American positions in the surrounding area. Shells crashed into the tree line, throwing up snow, splinters, and earth. The already shallow American cover shook under the impact. Under this curtain of fire, German armor and infantry moved out from Holtzwihr. According to later accounts, 6 tanks or self-propelled guns and an estimated 200 to 250 infantry advanced toward the woods held by Murphy's battered company. From his forward observation point, Murphy watched as the enemy came into view, gray-green figures spreading out across the snow, supported by armored vehicles grinding forward. This was no probing attack. It was a serious attempt to crush the American foothold and retake the woodline. Murphy quickly realized that if his small force stayed clustered too close to the open ground, they could be overrun or encircled. He had to buy time and space. He radioed for artillery support, calling down fire on the advancing German formations. Shells began to fall among the attackers, slowing but not stopping their advance. The 2 M10 tank destroyers engaged the German armor, firing their main guns and adding their own weight to the defense. But the Germans zeroed in on them quickly. One tank destroyer was hit and disabled. The other took a direct hit that set it on fire, flames licking up from the hull as ammunition inside began to explode. The crew of the burning M10 bailed out, abandoning the vehicle and retreating toward the woods. From a distance, the burning tank destroyer looked like nothing but a liability, a wreck about to blow apart in the middle of the battlefield. With one tank destroyer knocked out, and the other on fire, the American position suddenly looked even more fragile. German infantry continued to advance, using ditches, hedgerows, and the dips in the ground for cover. The tanks and assault guns pushed forward, firing into the tree line, and at any position they suspected held Americans. Murphy quickly evaluated his options. Company B was already under strength and exposed. If the men stayed where they were, they risked being crushed in place by the combination of armor and infantry. He made a decision that balanced survival with duty. He ordered his men to fall back into the woods, to the relative safety of deeper cover, where they could establish a more defensible line. Some of the soldiers hesitated, not wanting to leave their lieutenant alone. At the forward edge of the fight, Murphy insisted. He needed them alive, not lying in the snow around him. He remained forward, using a field telephone and radio to continue calling and adjusting artillery fire. On the advancing Germans, the barrage he requested was dangerously close, sometimes within just a few dozen yards of his own position. But he understood that if the enemy broke through here, there would be no safe place for his men anywhere nearby. As the German infantry drew closer, the burning M10 tank destroyer, sitting near the road and spewing smoke, was now between the Americans and the enemy. It looked like a death trap, flames, ammunition cooking off, a glaring target on open ground. Murphy looked at it and saw something else. A last chance. Murphy's carbine ammunition was running low, and the German infantry was closing the distance. From his position, he could see them moving through a drainage ditch, preparing to overrun the area. On top of the burning M10, the .50 caliber machine gun still sat in its ring mount, unused now that the crew had abandoned the vehicle. Using a destroyed vehicle as a firing position, while it burned and detonated around him, was, by any rational measure, insane. But rational options were gone. Murphy later explained that he simply couldn't abandon his position and let the Germans roll over his men. Stopping them, slowing them at least, was the only way to give his company a chance. Ignoring the risk that the tank destroyer might explode at any moment, he moved toward it, scrambling up onto the burning hull. The metal was hot. Smoke and flames rose around him. The air was thick with the smell of fuel and cordite. He climbed into the exposed turret area and seized the .50 caliber machine gun, swinging it toward the advancing Germans. At that moment, in the middle of an open field, on top of a burning vehicle, Audie Murphy was the most obvious target on the battlefield. He was now alone, standing above everything else, daring the Germans to try to kill him. When Murphy opened fire with the .50 caliber machine gun, the sound cut across the snow like tearing metal. Heavy rounds hammered into the German infantry, moving through the ditch and across the field. A squad of Germans tried to push up the drainage ditch, using it for cover as they advanced. Murphy walked the .50 cal's fire along the ditch, cutting them down and breaking their attempt to close the distance. Other groups of infantry attempted to fan out and flank his position. He swung the gun from one threat to the next, firing controlled bursts that forced men to dive for cover or drop where they stood. All the while, the burning tank destroyer shuddered under German return fire. Machine pistol rounds and rifle bullets smashed into the hull and turret. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky, one of Murphy's men, later recalled seeing bursts of German fire battering the vehicle. As Murphy stood on top of it, shrapnel and bullets struck around him. At some point during the fight, Murphy was wounded in the leg, but he kept firing, refusing to give up his position. He wasn't just shooting. With a field telephone in one hand and the machine gun in the other, he continued directing artillery fire onto the German formations, calling in corrections even as he fought them at close range. When an artillery officer asked how close the Germans were, Murphy reportedly held the phone toward the battlefield and said, "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to them." For nearly an hour he stayed on that burning vehicle, firing until the machine gun ammunition was nearly gone. He killed or wounded around 50 German soldiers by himself, according to his Medal of Honor citation and later accounts. German attempts to move past his position kept breaking apart, under the combined weight of his machine gun and the artillery he was adjusting. Tanks that had been pushing forward slowed or hesitated, unwilling to move without adequate infantry support. The attack, which had begun with momentum and numbers, now found itself pinned down by a single man on a burning wreck. Eventually, the .50 caliber ammunition was exhausted. The burning M10 was still at risk of catastrophic explosion, and Murphy had done all he could from that exposed position. He climbed down from the vehicle, his leg bleeding, and his body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Most soldiers in that condition would have gone to the rear for medical treatment. Murphy did something else. He returned to the tree line where his men were dug in, gathered what remained of Company B, and organized a counterattack. With the German assault now disrupted and demoralized, he led his soldiers forward, retaking lost ground, and pushing the enemy back from their positions near the woods. By the time the fighting around Holtzwihr died down, the American line was still intact. The German attack had failed to break through, and the northern edge of the Colmar pocket was one step closer to collapsing. For his actions that day: ordering his men to safety, staying alone to direct artillery, climbing onto a burning tank des, Treuer, single-handedly killing dozens of enemy soldiers, and then leading a counterattack despite his wounds. Audie Murphy would receive the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest award for valor. But at that moment, in the snow outside Holtzwihr, he wasn't thinking about medals. He was thinking about keeping his men alive, holding the line, and making sure the Germans did not get through. Word of what happened at Holtzwihr moved quickly up the chain of command. By the time the war in Europe ended, Audie Murphy had become the most decorated U.S. soldier of World War II. Over the course of the conflict, he would receive the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V for Valor, 3 Purple Hearts, the French and Belgian Croix de Guerre, and other foreign awards. On June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch of the U.S. 7th Army presented Murphy with the Medal of Honor. The citation described his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty. On January 26, 1945, at Holtzwihr, France, it highlighted how, for an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position, killing or wounding about 50 enemy soldiers and saving his company by refusing to yield ground. Murphy returned to the United States a hero in uniform, but fame did not sit comfortably on him. He was proud of what his men had done. He was far less comfortable with being singled out for it. When the firing finally died down around Holtzwihr, the snow was no longer clean. Shell craters pocked the fields. Burned vehicles sat twisted and black. Bodies, German and American, lay still in the cold. Company B had taken more losses, but it was still there. The position in the woods held. The German attack, which had begun with tanks, assault guns, and a wave of infantry, had been broken. The official tallies vary, but Murphy's Medal of Honor citation credits him with directing artillery that wiped out many of the enemy, and personally killing or wounding about 50 German soldiers, against 6 armored vehicles and roughly 250 infantry. 1 small American officer on a burning tank destroyer had turned what should have been a collapse into a stand. His refusal to retreat saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction, and allowed the Americans to hold the woods, the very ground the Germans had been trying to retake. In the bigger picture, the fight at Holtzwihr was just one piece of the Colmar campaign. But locally, it mattered. The northern shoulder of the pocket held, and the German defense in Alsace continued to crumble under Allied pressure. For his men, the story was simple. They had watched their lieutenant stay forward when everyone else pulled back, climb onto a burning vehicle, and hold the line alone until they could counterattack. For many of them, it was the difference between life and death. When Audie Murphy came home after the war, America was ready to celebrate its heroes. Newspapers ran his story. Life magazine put him on the cover. He was invited to Washington and honored across the country. But the boy from Texas, who had left school after the 5th grade and spent years in foxholes, found civilian life confusing and slow. He tried a brief stint in the Texas National Guard and considered various jobs. Then Hollywood called. Actor James Cagney took an interest in Murphy after seeing his photo in a magazine and invited him to California. Murphy took bit parts at first, slowly working his way into film. In 1949, he published his autobiography, To Hell and Back, a candid and straightforward account of his wartime experiences. The book became a bestseller, resonating with veterans and civilians alike, who wanted to understand what the war had really been like. In 1955, Universal released a film adaptation of To Hell and Back, with Audie Murphy playing himself. He reenacted his own battles on screen, including the stand at Holtzwihr. The movie became a massive hit, at the time Universal's highest-grossing film, and made Murphy a recognizable face far beyond military circles. Over the next 15 years, he appeared in more than 40 films, many of them westerns, trading the real battlefields of Europe for Hollywood backlots and movie sets. To the public, he was the perfect American war hero. Young, brave, modest, now a movie star. But behind the camera, the war he left behind never fully let go. Today we would call it post-traumatic stress disorder. For Audie Murphy and his generation, it had no official name. He suffered from nightmares, insomnia, and sudden flashbacks. Loud noises could trigger explosive reactions. Friends and family described episodes where he seemed to be back on the battlefield, just for a moment, before pulling himself together. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and his first marriage broke apart under the strain of his mood swings and inner turmoil. For a man celebrated as the bravest of the brave, admitting vulnerability was not easy. In the 1960s, Murphy publicly spoke about what we now recognize as PTSD, and urged the government to do more for veterans struggling with psychological wounds from the war. He even locked himself in a hotel room for a week to break a dependence on sleeping pills he had started using to cope with his insomnia. His life after the war was not simple. He made and lost money through acting, business ventures, and heavy gambling. He wrote song lyrics, including some recorded by country artists, and remained a visible figure in American culture, even as he wrestled with the invisible cost of what he had lived through. Audie Murphy had survived enemy fire, artillery, and the constant chance of sudden death. Living with the memories turned out to be its own kind of battle. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy was a passenger on a private plane flying through bad weather in Virginia. The aircraft, an Aero Commander 680, crashed into Brush Mountain near Roanoke, killing everyone on board. Murphy was 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7, 1971. His grave is in Section 46, just off Memorial Drive, close to the Memorial Amphitheater. Over time, the number of visitors coming to pay their respects grew so large that a special flagstone walkway was added near his grave to handle the traffic. Today, Audie Murphy's grave is the second most visited in Arlington, surpassed only by that of President John F. Kennedy. People come for different reasons. Some are history enthusiasts. Some are veterans. Some are just curious about the man who was once called America's most decorated soldier of World War II. All they see is a simple headstone, a name, the dates, and the Medal of Honor emblem carved in stone, the burning tank, the snow, the machine gun, and the hour at Holtzwihr are not visible there. But they are the reason the stone stands where it does. Audie Murphy's story is often summarized in numbers. 1 man, 6 attacking tanks, about 250 enemy soldiers, roughly 50 killed or wounded by his actions alone, 37 decorations for valor. But numbers can't fully explain why his story still resonates. Part of it is the contrast. A poor, underfed sharecropper's son, who was almost turned away by the services, became the man who stood alone on a burning tank destroyer and said, in effect, "You will not pass here." Part of it is what he did after the guns fell silent. He showed that heroism on the battlefield doesn't erase the inner wounds of war. And he spoke up, before it was common, about the psychological damage combat can leave behind, and part of it is that his story is a reminder of what war really is. On a map. January 26, 1945, near Holzwihr, is a small dot in a larger campaign. The reduction of the Colmar pocket. In history books, it's a paragraph about a young lieutenant who earned the Medal of Honor for a one-man stand. But on the ground, that day was something else. It was a field of snow, a handful of exhausted infantry, a burning vehicle, and a 20-year-old who decided he would rather stand and fight than watch his men die with their backs turned. In the end, Audie Murphy. One soldier, one burning tank, 1 hour that changed we, is not just a dramatic title. For the men of Company B, that 1 hour changed everything. For the German units that tried to push through Holzwihr, it marked the moment their attack broke. And for everyone who came after, it became a story about how much difference one human being can make. When they refused to move. Maps and borders shifted after the Colmar pocket fell, armies advanced, cities fell, and the war in Europe moved toward its final surrender. But the image that remains is simple. A small American soldier, standing alone on a burning tank in the snow, holding a machine gun and an entire line together at the same time. Because sometimes, in war, history doesn't turn on 1,000 men moving at once. Sometimes, it turns on one man who refuses to step back.